Hiya, welcome to another episode of Pickler the Podcast. We are your co-hosts, Stacie Townsend and John, the People's Champ Davison. John, what do you tell people when they ask you what are the benefits of pickleball?
What are the benefits? Health, obviously, and a good social network, because now I think like almost all of my friends are in the pickle world now. So that's one thing. I mean, I lost 65 pounds playing pickleball. So I would say health is one of the biggest things, for sure. And, keeps kids off the street, and on the courts. So it's all around good.
No, I agree. Pickleball, if it hits on your physical, your mental, your social, emotional, I think it hits everything. And I asked that question right away because I'm really excited to get to our guest today.
Mm-hmm.
And our guest tonight has identified all of these benefits that you have. He's been an advocate of the game for many years, even was good friends with one of the founders of the sport itself. And he's on a personal mission to share the game and the benefits with others. He's been featured on USA Today, I think the front page, above the fold, as some may say. He's also been featured here on Pickler, thanks to our amazing writer, Frank Cerabino. But I think you're going to be surprised by the population that he's trying to bring the power of pickleball to, because it wouldn't have come to my mind at first. But tonight's guest, Roger BelAir, is responsible for bringing pickleball to the criminal justice system. And in particular, some of the United States' largest institutions like Cook County in Chicago or Rikers Island in New York City. So to tell us more about what drives this mission, I'm just going to bring Roger right in and welcome to the podcast, Roger BelAir. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here, and I'm listening to your introduction. And John, good for you for losing 65 pounds. I mean, that's just tremendous. Just think how much or how healthy you are now as compared to carrying around that extra weight.
No, 100%. I mean, I've been a little lazy lately, so I've put about 15 to 20 back on. But yeah, a lot better.
Yeah.
So, Roger, let's start from the beginning with your pickleball and criminal justice journey. Where did this idea even come from?
Well, I used to be a professional speaker. I wrote a couple books, and that kind of led to a speaking career. I ran into at a party a guy by the name of Vince Lombardi. And I looked at him and I said, "You're not Vince Lombardi." I said that to myself, and he was Vince Lombardi Jr. And I'd written a book on how to borrow money from a banker for the business community. And Vince says, let me introduce you to my agent. You might be interested in doing some professional speaking. So I did do that, and I had that as my background. But I've been playing pickleball for a couple of years. I started out teaching because it was kind of a natural for me. And then it just kind of bloomed from there as far as the prison situation. I can tell you about that now, or we can talk about it later.
Well, I guess first, what year is this? What year?
Well, let's see. I started playing about 10 years ago, and it was 2016 or 2017 that I started going to prisons.
And so, what was the catalyst? What?
Well, here's what happened: is my wife and I often watch 60 Minutes, and one night they had a segment on Sheriff Tom Dart. Now, Sheriff Dart does the best he can of running Cook County Jail in Chicago, and Chicago's a really tough place. They have more homicides in Chicago than they do in New York City and LA combined.
Wow.
And Cook County last year had over 1,000 homicides. And so I'm watching this segment, and Tom's a great guy. I mean, he does the best he can, but you can imagine every day is a challenge for him, and every day he's being criticized for doing something. And I watch this segment, and the men and women just kind of sitting around. They're maybe playing cards, playing chess, or just chatting. And I said to my wife, they should really be playing pickleball. I love the game. I said they'd be getting exercise, but also they'd be gaining the benefits of maybe learning from mistakes and thinking about consequences. So there's an intangible there. But that was my primary focus. And then I was mulling it over, watching the piece, and I said to my wife, I'm going to write Sheriff Dart a letter and tell him exactly what I think. As a matter of fact, I'll even go back there and teach the game if he wants me to. Now, you can
Well,
imagine that he gets a lot of letters from a lot of people.
hmm
He gets this letter. It says pickleball. He'd never heard about it. He slides it over the right-hand side of his desk. And that night, he happened to mention, he's got 3 or 4 kids. Over the dinner table, he happened to mention, I got this letter from a guy, something about balls and pickles. Maybe he pitched a coup. And his 8-year-old daughter put her hands on her hips, I understand, and said, Dad, I'll tell you about pickleball. And if it hadn't been for that little girl, 8 years old, probably none of this would have happened.
Wow.
So did you have a background in like the criminal justice? You said money and banking. Like you just saw the 60 Minutes and you had this idea, or what?
I just, my wife at the time, when I told her I was going to write, she does have a media background, and she says, hey, your intentions are very good, but that's not a good idea. I don't think, he hears from a lot of kooks, and you don't want to add your name to the list. And I have absolutely no background at all in criminal justice. I've never been inside of a jail. I mean, the closest I came was getting a speeding ticket a couple of times. That's the extent of it. But like so many of your viewers and listeners, I love the game of pickleball, and I thought it was a natural fit for that segment.
What were your expectations going in? So obviously, Sheriff Tom Dart eventually allowed you to come into Cook County. Right. When you're leading up to this first experience, what were your expectations, or what were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, it's it's different to talk about going back to Cook County as compared to Cook County Jail as compared to being there. Mm-hmm. The place is absolutely huge. I mean, it's like 75 football fields. Mm-hmm. And my expectations, I guess, were all of a sudden, when I arrived, I got real nervous. I said, well, I'm trying to do the right thing, and my focus is just exercise and maybe a few life skills. But it really opened my eyes and really went in a different direction than I anticipated.
How so?
Well, I drive up, I look at Cook County Jail. I'm overwhelmed with the size of it. And I was there a week, and when I came out, I looked at that same sign. It says Maximum Security Division 10. And I realized then how much I had learned about what it's like on the inside. The first thing I realized is, most of these kids, and they're all kids to me, most of them are between 18 and maybe 25 or 30 years old. They never had much of a chance in life. They grew up in poverty. They oftentimes had came from a dysfunctional household. The people that they respected most, that were mentors in their life, were older kids in the neighborhood. Well, that's just code for saying gang members. See, there's 57 major gangs in Chicago. They have over 100,000 members. They outnumber the cops 10-1.
Wow.
And you grow up in that type of environment, and here's your role models. And being a gang member is a lot like being a member of the mafia. You want to progress, you want to impress your friends, you want to move up in the organization, you get involved in criminal activity. And sooner or later, that's what happened. I also thought at that moment about Warren Buffett, because I was fortunate enough once to be in a meeting with Warren, and somebody asked him, he said, Warren, why are you successful? Why have you been able to make so much money and be so successful financially in your life? And Warren, I thought for maybe 10 seconds. And he said, probably more than anything else, I grew up in a household and an environment with a certain set of values. And then as I was growing up, I had mentors that reflected those values. And that probably put me on the right path. And the reason I think of that is Warren ended up at one end of our society, and these kids that we're talking about today, young men, ended up at the other. Mm-hmm. So that just shocked the heck out of me. But the second thing that I really realized in looking at that sign after a week is how much mental illness there is on the inside. You can tell in just talking to some of these people, they're just not quite tracking with you. It's not appropriate to go up to somebody and say, "What'd you do? Why are you here?" It's trying to think of an analogy. Well, it's like a little bit on the outside of going up to somebody and say, "How old are you?" Some people would tell you the truth. Some people wouldn't. Some would be offended. Maybe some others wouldn't. But you just normally don't do it. And Stacie, I happen to be, when I teach, I give some instruction, put them out on the court, sitting on the bench, talking to this guy, relating to him particularly well. And all of a sudden, the words, despite what I just told you, popped out of my mouth. "What are you doing here?" And he gave me an honest answer. He says, "I'm bipolar. I was off my meds, and I didn't mean to kill him."
Dang.
Wow.
But there's a lot, I don't know the statistics, and of course, mental illness is on a sliding scale, but there's many, many people on the inside that struggle with mental challenges.
No, I'm sure.
So those were the two main takeaways after a week of being back there.
Wow. Was it intimidating at all? Or
John, it's very intimidating. I went inside, I go through clearance, and all of a sudden I find myself standing in a room with 25 men. And I thought I'd give them a little background just about the game and how Joe Pritchard started it and Barney McCallum. And it wasn't working. I mean, I very quickly realized that I wasn't getting through to them at all. I mean, they were all young. I'm not. I'm old. They're from Chicago, and I live in a place called Seattle. But the third thing I realized is my life is easy. I'm very blessed with a great family, a great lifestyle, and for them, every single day of their life is a challenge. It's a struggle. They're trying to get through the day, and they don't know if a fight is going to break out. And if a fight does break out, of course, you have to side with your team, your gang members, because if you don't, they're going to come after you the next day. So every day is a challenge. I thought of my wife's comment about my intentions were good. I thought about, well, tonight am I going back to Seattle? I wasn't sure what to do. So I said, well, I cut my presentation short. I said, let's go out the courts. And I would say it maybe took 5 minutes. They went from absolutely having no interest at all in what I had to say to listening to every single word. I was like a Pied Piper. And these very macho guys in the room that I was talking to them turned into what I call like third graders on a playground. The transformation, I've never seen anything like it in my life. I said, it's hard for me to believe this is the same group of people.
So the transformation was pretty much immediate.
Immediate.
It didn't take them a long time to really fall in love with it. Yeah.
And I thought a lot about that. I taught the game to many people, well over 1,000. And all of a sudden, this was later in the day, sweat is just pouring off these guys. Most of these guys I was working with had been charged with murder. You can imagine how much stress you have if you've been charged with a crime like that, guilty or innocent. And then everybody around you is charged with a similar type crime. Tremendous amount of stress. And the sweat was just pouring off these guys. And I said, I'm not working them that hard. What's going on here? And then I figured it out, just how stressful they are. And once they get out on the court, things change. It makes their world go away. Because just like the rest of us, when they're on the court, all they're thinking about is hitting that ball over the net.
Right.
Amazing. It was an absolutely amazing transformation.
Yeah, and then they get that like sense of competition again without violence, right? There's not the like you mentioned, there's competition in a jail, of course, right? Between groups.
Right.
But in that sense, it's more of like, a fun game
Absolutely.
where they can be competitive without like it, being malicious, right?
Right. That's exactly right. All right, because it's intense, it's competitive, but mentally, what happens is when we all step onto the court, our mind checks out. We don't think about our
Mm-hmm.
problems. These guys have a lot more problems than the rest of us, believe me. All right, and the rest of the time that they're awake, they're thinking about their problems, and that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
reasons that. Well, we all love the game. We all know that, but that's one of the reasons it's so important on the inside, and they have so much a desire to play it because they can escape. They're not in their environment.
What other benefits does bringing pickleball to the jails like this have, whether it's for the individual inmates or for the jail institution as a whole?
Well, there's two aspects that I didn't think, never thought would happen. All right. The first is all of a sudden you've created a tremendous desire for these people on the inside to want to do something. And because they want to do it, they hear from the warden, it comes down. If you guys want to play out in the court, then you got to behave yourselves. So it's a carrot rather than a stick.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to play. So there's less fights, there's less disciplinary problems on the inside because of that. But even more startling to me, and we talked a little about this gang activity with the 57 major gangs and how they're continually at each other's throats and all the murders that they have back there. Is I'm sitting on the bench with Clarence, and he says, "Roger, look out there on the court." Well, I look out there and I just see some people playing pickleball. I don't see anything. He says, "You don't understand." And I said, "Well, I guess I don't." He said, "You have opposite gang members out on the courts playing pickleball with and against each other. Some of these guys before pickleball wouldn't even talk to each other. And now look at them. Wow, that just blows me away. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how a sport, any activity at all that can do that type of thing, that's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's something I never anticipated on the inside.
How rewarding was that feeling?
Well, it's almost kind of beyond belief.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much intensity and so many of my emotions of going down to the depths of I'm not relating at all to the intimidation of the size to see this type of thing happen. I've been back to Chicago, and three times I've been there. The last time I walked in, everybody stood up and started clapping. I was like a rock star. Roger's here, everybody. They were giving each other high fives. And of course, it's not because of me. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
It's all because of pickleball and what it represents. So
100%.
yeah. So certainly a moment that I'll never forget. But how do you even put something like that into words? And you realize you take yourself out of it. It's what's
Mm-hmm.
it doing for them? I mean, that's what this is all about. And what's it doing for our society? Because 95% or more of all inmates eventually are going to be released to the outside. And if we can do anything at all to make them better on the inside, it's going to be beneficial for all of us once they get out, because today's inmate is going to be tomorrow's neighbor.
Mm-hmm. I think that's like kind of, one of the big problems in the criminal justice system, right, is, yes, they've done bad things or, they've been convicted of bad things, whether they did them or not.
Sure.
Right. But the type of like trauma that they go through in the prison, right,
Mm-hmm.
is just once they get out, how do they escape that? Right. Like how have they gotten better as people, or, you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. All right. And so let me give you a statistic. All right. Many of these people they don't have much education. They don't have much skills. They certainly don't have much money. Frequently, they don't have much support on the outside. And all of a sudden, they're released back into society. All right. Well, the first thing you need is a job to get some money to come in. Right. Well, in most states, you can't get you can't sell real estate because you cannot get a real estate license. You cannot sell insurance for the same reason. You can't even sell used cars because you can't get a license to do that.
Wow.
You can't become a social worker. You can't even become a barber. You can't even join the military. So it's not surprising that a year after getting out, over 40% of felons are still looking for income. They're still looking for a job. Well, out on the West Coast in particular, we have just a horrendous problem with homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're homeless, would you rather be in Cleveland or would you rather move out to Seattle where the climate's much more favorable? And it's an epidemic out here. I mean, it's just hard to believe. But many of these people are exactly who I described. They came out of jail or prison and they were rightfully sent there, but now they need to put their lives back together. And how do they do that? And there's all kinds of barriers. And so because they don't have the skills and the education and the support, they end up as being part of our homeless problem.
Right. Now, when you've introduced this to, you've introduced this to jails and prisons all over the country, right? Now, is it still an ongoing thing in those prisons, or was it like a one-time thing and then they don't get to play anymore?
No, it's very, where I've gone is been very well received. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out in Chicago at Cook County Jail, and then I went to Rikers Island in New York. Rikers Island is an island off of Manhattan, and there's actually 10 different facilities there, one for women, one for new arrivals, people leaving. The deputy commissioner was so impressed by the time I left that he ordered pickleball equipment for all 10 sites.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And they have almost 100,000 people that flow through Rikers Island every year.
Wow.
And 100,000, probably in Chicago, maybe it's 75,000. I've introduced in the state of Washington. I introduced in California. It was going great guns. I mean, tremendous support. I was at Corcoran, where Charles Manson spent so many years of his life, maximum security. We were just starting to blow it open. I had plans to go to Colorado. They were going to bring in the recreational supervisor from 8 different sites. I was working with colleagues for New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and then COVID hit. And you talk about shutting something down. I mean, not that they don't have enough problems on the inside, but as you can imagine, you have an awful lot of macho men that are inmates as well as staff that says, I'm not getting vaccinated. And how do you practice social distancing on the inside?
Mm-hmm.
You really don't. They have so many challenges and have continued to have challenges ever since COVID started. Some places are still playing the game, but they're just really trying to get through the day these days.
Dang. Well, have you had any like behavioral psychologists study some of your, the work that you've done, introducing pickleball to these inmates? Have you had any of those behavioral, psychologists reach out to you and try to get findings and, and changes of behavior?
John, we haven't, we're not at that stage. And as you can imagine, it's really institutionalized. As far as the bureaucracy, as far as the attention, there's a variety of opinions on how it should be run on the inside. And we're not even close to that. But the really great news is what pickleball how it's impacted people who have played the game on the inside. And once COVID permits, what's going to happen after that point in time? It's going to spread very quickly. But there hasn't been any studies as far as the involvement of other than what the guards tell me and the warden tells me and things like that.
Anecdotally, do you think there's anything similar to pickleball that can bring these inmates together or teach them life skills? Is there anything else, or do you think pickleball is in this own unique space?
Boy, that's a good question. I think that the main takeaways are the exercise benefit, to a minor degree, the life skills of learning about mistakes. But when you can start reducing violence on the inside and reducing disciplinary problems, that's fantastic. And not only that, but the other thing is if you can open lines of communication between opposite gangs, that's tremendous. I was telling my good buddy the other day that we were talking about our society and how polarized it is, and this a corporation will do sensitivity training, and it doesn't matter what the topic is, so they'll bring all these people in the room, and everybody has an opinion probably walking in, and they certainly know while in the room to say the right thing, and maybe at the end of the day you move the needle a little bit. You contrast that with taking two groups of people that for whatever reason will not even talk to each other, and they voluntarily come together over an activity, and they not only talk but they laugh together. There just has to be some positive result in that situation.
Totally agree. The way you describe it with the gangs, I can't help but think about like the political factions.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's been reports at like the state capitol in Utah where you have Democrats and Republicans playing in the rotunda, playing pickleball against each other.
Yeah,
So it's amazing.
That's tremendous. I mentioned earlier that I've been back to Chicago 3 times. So the third time I was back there, so was a reporter for USA Today, a sports reporter, and he was going to write up a story for the sports page. And he called me up a couple of days later, and he said, "Roger, I don't know how to tell you this. It's not going to be on the sports page." And guys, my heart just kind of dropped. I was all excited. They took some pictures back there. They interviewed some of the people and myself, and I was really looking forward to the story. And the first thought that went through my mind is, why did they kill it? I mean, what didn't they like about it? And then he added, he said, the editors read the story, and they were so impressed, they're going to put it on the front page of USA Today. They're going to put it on Friday, which is the issue that gets the most circulation. And that story about the guy sitting on the bench with me it was part of that. And if somebody pulls it up online, they can see a picture of us, the two of us sitting on the bench.
The power of pickleball, right?
Power of pickleball.
Well, I mean, it's incredible to hear that story, Roger, not only for the effects of the inmates or the detainees, but also like what you took away from it, which I think is interesting, and what we can learn about the system. Like, I myself have no experience with the criminal justice system, but to hear your perspective on what they go through and why they're there, and maybe there's some misconceptions around a lot of that. So it's really interesting to hear that part of the story too.
Well, thank you. But it's interesting because I've kind of lived this and I've seen some of the benefits. But as you know, in our society, when it comes to so many topics, people are very polarized. And I introduced it into one state, I won't mention it, and they were having great success. The violence was down. Then what happened was they had an election and got a new governor who appointed a new head of prisons. And he came out and said, these people are here to learn lessons, and they're here to be disciplined. There won't be more pickleball. So it stopped it cold. So I respect the man's opinion. I just disagree with him.
Sure. I don't know if I'm a lawyer by trade, Roger. So at law school, that was a very common debate, whether it should be punishment and disciplinary or rehabilitation. And obviously pickleball is focused more on the rehabilitation aspect, but very polarizing.
Yeah. Well, Barney McCallum, which was one of the founders, and I got to be pretty good friends. And Barney had a great interest in criminal justice. He took several classes about it when he was in college. And we used to sit down and talk about that. And of course, he, with his love of pickleball and following my career as far as the game, was very interested in that. But we talk exactly as like you just said, because people come from different points of view.
So tell us
Well,
a little bit about your relationship with Barney. You mentioned you've been in pickleball for 10 years. You are probably one of the handful of people that knew one of the founders. Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey there.
Well, of course, as everybody knows, it was invented on Bainbridge Island. Everybody, I guess, is going to listen to this podcast. And Barney and Joe and Bill formed a small company to promote pickleball, and this was in 1972. And then they eventually ended up running it out of Barney's company. He was in the envelope business, and then they kind of sputtered off so it had its own facility. And I got to know David McCallum, who's Barney's son, and David said, "Roger, let me introduce you to my dad, Barney, if you'd like to." And of course, I said yes. He was living in a retirement community at that time, and so we went up and met, or I met Barney, and Barney was a real character, and he's one of those guys who I'd call very much of a straight shooter. He'd tell you exactly what he thought, and if he liked you, he really liked you, and if he didn't, you kind of knew that too. And Barney and I just instantly hit it off. With our backgrounds and my involvement in criminal justice and his interest in the topic. And so I would visit him maybe once a month or so. I'd stop in and we'd chat. And he said, "What do you hear? What's the latest? I hope they're not messing with the rules. You've got those people out there that want to change the rules. Leave it just the way it is." So I met him in 90 when he was, I think, about 90, and he passed away at the age of 92 or 93.
Oh, wow.
So can you settle the great debate on the name of pickleball, since you knew one of the founders?
Oh, boy. Yeah, the name of pickleball. All right. So let me tell you what I know. And I not only know Barney and David, but a number of the kids that played over there on the courts at that time. And to go to Bainbridge is really a tremendous experience because you can see the court that behind Joel's house. And as you can imagine, on the island, all these homes are waterfront. They're right next to each other, and everybody gets to know everybody very well. The first time I was over there, people are wandering in different houses, getting a cup of coffee and that type of thing. I was told, "Roger, if you want privacy, then be sure and lock the bathroom door." That's the type of place it is. And so I bet you can imagine what happens frequently on a night about 5 o'clock. They ended up at somebody's house. They have a drink and talk about the day. They, up until that point in time, I understand they called it the game. You know what? You want a game tomorrow morning? How about 10 o'clock? Would that work? That's what they did. And so one night, this happened to be at Pritchard's house, according to Barney, is somebody says, we ought to come up with a legitimate name for this sport. They batted around some ideas, rally ball, tennis, pong. And finally somebody said, "Hey, Joe, you got that dog that grabs that ball, runs off the court, underneath the bushes. We got to get our hands and knees. It's actually Pickle's ball, so let's just call it pickleball." Somebody laughed, and somebody else laughed, and they said, "Great, let's have another drink." So from that point forward, it was pickleball. Now, Joe was originally in the envelope business, and then what happened in 1972, he got elected to Congress. So he went back to Washington, D.C. He was married to Joanne, and in 1974, they got a divorce. The marriage didn't work out. So they went their separate ways. And talking to people that played back then, they all said the same thing. But here's what happened the way I understand it. In 1997, now this is 32 years after the game was created. It was the year that Joel died. And before he died, Joanne, his wife, said to the media, and pickleball was starting to grow a little bit back then. Nothing like it is, of course, today, but there was a lot more interest. Said to the media, people think it was named after the dog. The dog actually came later. What it was it was named after a pickle boat, which is taking different parts of different boats and putting them together. So it was named after a pickle boat. And oh, by the way, Joanne, I'm the one that named the sport. Picked up in by the media. The word spread, and now you have these two different stories. And I'll tell you something that's interesting about human nature is teaching as many people as I have, the name comes up frequently. And so I just say what I told you people. But I found that whatever story people have heard first, they're absolutely convinced that that's the right one. All right. And Barney said to me, he'd slap his knee and say something like, Roger, since 1997, at least once a week, I've had to tell this pickleball name story. I'm sick and tired of it. And then he'd go on and tell exactly what I just told you.
Well, I like the dog story better, so I'm happy with that.
Well,
Yeah.
It's just kind of interesting. It's just kind of interesting. There's
Yeah.
a small group of people that still believe that's absolutely right. Most of us, we're not around then. We weren't involved with the sport, but fortunately for me, and it's been great to meet some of those people. It's fun to talk about.
Yeah. I personally like the dog story better just because who doesn't love dogs? So
Yeah.
I guess some people, but I like dogs. So I'm going with the dog story.
All right. Well, both stories are out there. If you go to Wikipedia, both are mentioned, but that came from Barney. That came from his son. That came from other people that were over on the courts playing at the same time.
Yeah. I have a question about, the jail, the prison, pickleball. Do you know of any of their like mental shifts that have happened since then? And if they like still are happier because they've played pickleball and they have like something else to like look forward to when they get out as well? Or do you keep in contact with anyone inside, or that people have, since left the prison that you've taught?
I've been advised not to form friendships. And you run into people that you would like, and a friendship could develop. But I've been encouraged not to do that. And very definitely, I'm there to help them and introduce the game of pickleball. And that's kind of the extent of my relationship with them. I know that on more than one occasion, a guard has said something to me, like when I'm back at a place 2 or 3 times, is, Roger, you don't remember some of these guys, but I can tell you that they're not going to forget you because you introduced pickleball to them. And what it does to their mental state of mind of having something that they can focus on and look forward to. It's just terrible on the inside. And I'm not saying they're not deserving of being there, but I'm just saying that it's a lot different than what most of us can imagine, because there's so much stress and tension continually about when's the fight going to break out next. And when I was back in Rikers Island in particular, you go into the lunchroom, you try to have a tuna fish sandwich, alarms would be going off, you'd be smelling tear gas, and there's just continual tension.
Dang. What are another one for you? What are some like common misconceptions that people, on the outside, like, Stacie, you and I have about people in the prison system? Like, what are some common misconceptions that just maybe aren't true? Or like, what do you think, like getting to know these prisoners, like what they want the people on the outside to really know about them?
Boy, that's a good question. I'll tell you one thing that I really notice on the difference of people on the inside, and that is they have street smarts. They are really good at sizing somebody up. And I mentioned that to one of the guards once, that compared to the average person on the street, these guys are just a lot more intuitive about who you are, where you're coming from, what are your motivations. And the guard said something to me like, well, Roger, that's probably one of the reasons that they're still alive. Because if they don't have street smart, something's going to happen.
Right.
A lot of them are certainly uneducated. A lot of them have the mental illness that you can talk about. A lot, others are very bright, and you just kind of say, well, what happened? You know, you don't know that much about your past. If you go up to, and I've done this, is go up to a guard and say, Sue or Paul over there, you know, kind of what do you do? I mean, he just doesn't seem like he fits or whatever. You always get kind of the candid answer of, well, I really don't know. You know, we don't pry into or look up the records of somebody to see exactly what's happened. We try to treat them all the same. Well, I don't believe that. I think they know exactly what they did, but it's just kind of an answer that we don't want to go there.
So what are your goals next with this, Roger? You said COVID kind of brought you to a major halt. What do you see as the next steps and timing on this mission to bring pickleball to the institutions?
You know, we've talked about the positive experiences. I've approached a variety of prisons, and pickleball wasn't as well known then, and I faced a lot of rejection. But what I've learned is if I can have the support at the top, that's all I need. If I get the support at the top, then everybody falls in line and says, yes, we'll do it. I'm very fortunate in the Department of Corrections in California is they get it. You know, of course, California has more prisoners than any other state, but they're encouraging me to set up a 501c3. They're talking about places I can go for grant money. They would like me to set up a website. They want to introduce me to the top name prisons in California, like San Quentin and Paul Capay, which is only Supermax. And they says it will be success there, and then we can spread it downward to other prisons. And so, and then I told you about Colorado, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, and the ambassador program for pickleball with over a couple thousand ambassadors. I get a call probably, or a text or an email, something about once a month of saying, I want to introduce that to my state. How do I do that? So, Stacie, right now it's all based on COVID. You know, I don't want to go inside right now because I know how dangerous it is. And I know that they will not be getting shots, and you can't have social distancing. And the tremendous stress they're under, you know, we read daily about employment problems and people trying to get staff. Well, I can say, who'd want to work in prison? You know, it's lousy pay, terrible hours, no hardly any chance for advancement, and it's very dangerous. And so it's a real challenging situation, but I'm looking forward to the day, and it will come, that not only I, but many others can go inside a prison and spread the word about pickleball.
So what's keeping you busy in the meantime? Maybe formalizing this mission of yours with the website and such, or what else are you cooking?
Actually, I've had just an incredible amount of media coverage. 2 weeks ago, I was interviewed by ESPN, and they flew a crew out from New York and to talk to me and a couple others in the area. And he says, reporters said, everywhere I go, everybody's talking about pickleball. And he was looking for me for a reaction, and I kind of said, well, yeah. So I had that. I had an interview last week with Tennis Magazine. I also met with, I got a phone call from the Seattle Times, which is the largest newspaper in the state of Washington, and they're doing a profile.
Wow.
So I've had just a lot of media attention, and I haven't really done anything at all as far as the website or grant money or anything like that because the timing's not right. You know, one of these days I think I'll probably hook up with somebody that has some experience in web design or whatever, and I'm going to donate. Certainly, I donate all my time, and maybe that person will too, as far as getting a website up.
Well, if anybody's out there listening can help Roger get a little more media or presence on the web, that would be helpful. You can reach out to me at Stacie@thepickler.com, and I'll get you in touch with Roger and help him out. So, John, do you have any final questions? I think I have one or two for Roger, but I want to see what's on your mind.
I'll let you go. I've already plugged in my questions I prepared. You know, I don't always do that, but I did this time. So the floor is yours, Stace.
All right. Well, Roger, I know we've kind of talked about this, but 10 years, why do you think pickleball now is getting so much attention?
Well, let's go back a point in time to 65 when Barney and Joel, those were the two main guys, and created this. They thought they had a winner because everybody loved it.
Hmm.
But if you create a sport, how do you promote it? And so they went to companies like Spalding and Wilson and said, here's this terrific sport. And those companies looked at it and said, well, at the time you got a $3 wooden paddle and you got a 50-cent plastic ball. There's absolutely no money to be made in this sport. We'd rather sell tennis shoes. So the sport just kind of limped along during the 70s, 80s, 90s. And one figure we have in 2003, there was only 39 known public places to play around the country.
Wow.
And now it's close to 10,000, somewhere around 10,000. All right.
Wow.
But they did, so they really worked hard at trying to promote it, but without much success. And what happened around 2002, 2003 is baby boomers started retiring to Arizona in particular and also to Florida. They loved it during the winter months, and then during the summer when they went north, they wanted to play it. So that's what caused the game to spread so much. One of the stories that Barney told me that I really got a kick out of is they said, we're trying to promote this doggone sport. We know it's a winner. We just can't get traction. And they were really hoping the same thing would happen as happened with tennis. And what happened with tennis is the people, the Clark Gables and Jack Benny started playing the game, and then it became a celebrity sport. And that's what really helped tennis take it to the next level. So Barney and David would go to trade shows, sports trade shows. And what they do is they set up a tennis or a pickleball court, and then Barney would look for a younger couple, maybe out of college or something like that, and approach him and say, you want to learn a new sport? I'll teach you the rules as we go. So he'd get two couples, and they both said sure. And then he'd act like a carnival barker of getting everybody to come around and watch these people play this new sport. And then all of a sudden he says, and today what we're going to have is the girls against the boys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, both these couples kind of looked at each other. They weren't anticipating that, but well, that's all right. I mean, after they get over the surprise of it. So he'd get the boys on one side, the girls on the other, and he'd go up to the girls and say, just hit the ball over the middle of the net. That's all I want you to do. Just hit it over the middle of the net. And of course, the guys, being guys, they start playing this game, and they got to show off somewhat. They know they're going to win. It's just by a matter of how much. So they're starting to hit the ball hard, be a banger. And of course, oftentimes what happens, they fell behind 2 or 3 points. Well, what does that do? That increases the stress level to work even harder. And then Barney would go up to the girls and say, you're doing just fine. Just do what I told you. Say nothing to the boys. And more times than not, the girls won.
That's funny.
Too funny.
But that was indicative of who Barney was, and the way he approached it. I'll always remember the time I called Barney up and said, "Hey, Barney, I'm going to be downtown Seattle tomorrow morning. Can I just show up and we'll chat?" And he barked back at me. He said, "Well, what time?" And now I'm put on the spot. All right. Well, all right. My first reaction was, "Well, I don't know what time, but you're not going to be doing anything anyway." Of course, I didn't say that. So I said, "All right, Barney, 10 o'clock." So I wait till it's exactly 10 o'clock, knock on his door, and he said, "Roger, come on in." He said, "You want a shot of whiskey or you want a cup of coffee?" And I said, "Barney, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. You know that I don't drink coffee until the afternoon." He laughed, I laughed. We had some orange juice, but that's who he was.
So it sounds like
cool
more courts, celebrity, and definitely you need Barney on the court, flogging the sport for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, Roger, is there anything else that we should know about you and your journey, or how we can help support you and your mission?
I might give my email address if that's all right.
Go for
And
it.
that way, if
Yeah,
somebody has any questions about what's going on in the inside prisons or anything we covered this time that they can go ahead and reach out to me. And it's real easy to remember. It's BelAir with an extra R on the end of it. So it's BEL capital AIRR at gmail.com.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I think it's a great mission you have, and pickleball is, I always talk about the power of pickleball in our lives, but seeing what it can do for people that don't have the same upbringing, I guess, as we do, the same lucky births, I suppose. So that's very special what you are doing.
Well, thank you. The good news is making a difference on the inside. And when that happens, it's going to impact all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly. So, John, do you want to take us out?
Yeah. So, Roger, what we do here on the Pickler podcast, we always cheers the camera. So I don't know if you have a drink around you.
I sure do.
So
wait, is it whiskey
ready?
or coffee?
Yeah. Well, it's not whiskey, I can tell you that.
Thank you, Roger, for joining us, and we'll cheers the camera and Pickler out.
All right.